Welcome to New York Got Game.
We're back with another episode of New York Got Game. We've got some good stuff to get into this week, including what the Knicks and the Nets might do at the trade deadline and a look at what some Liberty players have been focused on this offseason. Action-packed show, so let's get right to it. Tim Kitzrow, take us to the first segment.
The Knicks are heating up.
Okay, we are inching towards the end of trade season. The NBA trade deadline is this Thursday, February 8th. The Knicks, they've already made a deal this season, but is there more in the works? What should the Nets do with where they are in the Eastern Conference standings? We are going to preview the deadline for the local teams, and we're going to do it with the senior NBA insider for HoopsHype and the host of the HoopsHype podcast, fellow Brooklynite, my good friend, my guy, Michael Scotto. Mike, what's up, man?
What's up, Dexter? Happy to join you, man. Always good to be with a fellow Brooklynite.
It is. See, I say that all the time. Always good to be with a fellow Brooklynite. You and I go way back. Mm-hmm. I am thrilled to see you in the position that you are as a senior NBA insider for HoopsHype. But this is busy season for you right now. We know this is a busy time for you right now. How have you been handling all the news and information that you have to bring to the people?
Well, Dexter, I think this year it's been a lot better in the sense of we've seen some of the bigger trades happen already. We saw Pascal Siakam go to the Indiana Pacers. We saw the New York Knicks make their big splash in getting OG Anunoby for R.J. Barrett and Emmanuel quickly. So it's kind of divvied it up a little bit and made it more manageable, I would say. Look, you know this being in New York, the phone's been lighting up like Times Square on New Year's Eve when it comes to this time of the year. It always has. And, you know, some people may wonder if it's going to be a more active trade deadline or not. But my vantage point has always been when it seems like it's calmer or quieter, usually that's the calm before the storm. It may not be the stars, but I do expect there to be an active trade deadline given the new rules for the CBA coming in. So some teams may want to get some things done now, which we'll be happy to talk about coming up.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but we're definitely going to focus on the local teams here. I'm going to get right into it with Mike. We're going to start with the Knicks because the Knicks, they've played very well of late. 9 wins in their last 10 games since the December trade for OG Anunoby. They've been really hot. If you were Leon Rose and you're looking at this team, how would you be looking to improve this New York roster at the deadline?
I mean, right now, Dexter, like I had mentioned, I think OG Anunoby was their big splash. Right now, the biggest question is going to be, what's the health of Julius Randle? And ultimately, if he's going to miss a substantial amount of time, they're going to reevaluate him. Doesn't mean he's coming back in, 2-3 weeks. That could just mean that they're going to have another update and he's out further. If the Knicks internally know that he's going to be out for a prolonged period of time, then I could see them going into the trade market and possibly making a short-term move, maybe adding some front court depth if they need. But right now, folks, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They've been on a roll with OG Anunoby. And he's also dealing with an injury, but when he's played, I think they've only lost 2 games with him in the lineup. So he's the perfect Tom Thibodeau guy, a little bit reminiscent of Luol Deng when he was with the Bulls. So, big picture-wise, I know the Knicks have been in talks with other players, which we're going to get into, but if anything, I see it as like a short-term upgrade to kind of fortify the depth because they have a good thing rolling right now. And most times you don't want to tinker with that.
Yeah, you don't want to mess with that. The vibes are good at MSG. The team has been playing really well. There's no doubt about that. But there has been talk when you look at this team in terms of offensive struggles at times, especially when Jalen Brunson's not on the court. There's been talk about the team needing a backcourt playmaker capable of running the offense, as I said, when Jalen Brunson goes to the bench. I want to go through some names with you that I think could fit, and I think some fans might agree, could fit the need for the Knickerbockers. I want you to tell me why or why not you think that player is likely. So let's do this. Let's start with a former Knick, okay?
Sure.
Alec Burks, on an expiring contract with the Pistons. Is he a likely, and I'll put this nicely, a low-cost fit for the Knickerbockers to try to acquire him?
Well, Dexter, I mean, you mentioned it, low cost. This is a guy that's on an expiring contract. A lot of teams around the league have poked around on him, and one team also, the Minnesota Timberwolves, I could think of off the top of my head. Teams that are looking for just veteran bench depth. But for the Knicks, right now, given where they are, I don't think they need that as much. I think, as you touched on, it's more about finding a ball handler. Now, Tom Thibodeau has always been a fan of Alec Burks, and I certainly think, if they traded for him, that they would find a role for him. But at this point, I don't know if I would say it's likely. I would say it would depend on their appetite, how many second-round picks they would want to give up. When you touched on the low cost, and I talk with GMs around the league, essentially that's where the market is right now. Detroit, looking for future draft picks. They've got a young core. their strength, when you look at their team for the future, is about their young backcourt. Alec Burks is expendable at that point. Mostly you're looking at a varying level of second-round pick compensation for him. I wouldn't say that he is of high priority for the Knicks, but he's certainly on the board. And I will tell you, it's as big as the graphic behind me. They have a wide range of candidates, Dexter.
All right, so the Knicks, as you hear that from Scotto, they were looking at a wide range of candidates in terms of filling that backcourt need. Let's go to another name.
Sure.
Trailblazers guard Malcolm Brogdon. He's been linked to the Knicks. One would think the cost would be more to get Brogdon than a guy like Burks, right? that would make sense. What do you think it would take for the Knicks to land the reigning sixth man of the year and bring him to NYC?
Well, Dexter, anytime I've posed that exact question to NBA executives around the league, they say that Brogdon's a guy that could potentially bring back a first-round pick. The question is who's going to give that up. When it comes to Portland, they have valued Malcolm Brogdon as a veteran leader for their young backcourt with Scoot Henderson, with Shaedon Sharpe, and Anthony Simons. And I spoke to Brogdon recently when he was in town at MSG, and he talked about feeling more valued with Portland, which does matter to him. While it may not be an ideal situation, and Chauncey Billups touched on that because he's a guy that can play high-level sixth-man minutes, they value his leadership just as much off the court with this team. And so I really do think it would have to be a first-round pick, or you would have to give up a boatload of seconds. But Portland hasn't really shown that much of a desire to move off him as much as people would have thought. At least that's the sense I get from talking to the executives that are calling Portland, trying to gauge where his value is right now and whether they would part with him.
And that's a little shocking because after the Drew Holiday trade, I think a lot of people said, okay, Malcolm Brogdon, he's going to be flipped. They're going to flip him.
I thought Robert Williams was going to be flipped immediately.
Before he got hurt. Right.
And especially when they had DeAndre Ayton, to your point. I thought he would have been flipped, and then he got hurt. So it shows you how the market and the value of a player can flip on a dime.
Yeah, that's a definite player I think fans are going to want to watch closely as we get closer to that trade deadline on Thursday, the 8th. I want to ask you about Bruce Brown. He's come up a lot, too, and he's with the Raptors now, was in that Pascal Siakam trade between Indiana and Toronto. He made a little bit of noise among Knicks fans last month when he said that he's a Tom Thibodeau type of player. Now, we know this. He's a guy who could defend multiple positions, Mike. But I got to ask you this. Does he fit in with this Knicks team, or is he redundant when you have Josh Hart on this roster?
Well, it's funny when you say redundant. At some point, you've got to ask yourself, how many 6'4" guards can the New York Knicks have? They have a bevy of them. And listen, they have a lot of them, and they're productive. Don't get me wrong. But I would say over the summer, Bruce Brown was going to be their #1 target in free agency. Now, obviously, they came to a deal with Josh Hart, and the Pacers blew the market away when they essentially, compared to everybody else, overpaid for Bruce Brown to get him on a short-term deal. And part of that deal is there is a team option which gives Toronto a little bit of flexibility if they want to keep him and drag this out for another year to determine whether he can be a part of that core that they have there. He's somewhat in a similar age to R.J. Barrett, a little bit older than Emmanuel Quickley, but in the ballpark, the same range. Toronto has not necessarily shown this desire to completely rebuild. It seems like they're trying to bring in some young guys to complement Scotty Barnes and go forward and try to make some noise down the road and extend that timeline. And so for me, when I'm looking at Bruce Brown with the Knicks, and pretty much any team, similar to Brogdon's, can take at least a first-round pick, #1, because Toronto's doing this dance in a sense where they want to get a rotation guy and a future pick. If you can do that, sure. But there's a lot of teams, the Lakers, the Dallas Mavericks, a lot of teams are trying to get Bruce Brown. So I'm curious, as we get closer to the deadline Thursday, who, kind of gun to the head is going to make the move? Because you know as much as we do.
Right.
The closer you get to the deadline, that's when the action is going to happen, and you have the most amount of information of where your team is. Is Bruce Brown going to make, to your point, that much of a difference on the Knicks, given what they already have? It would depend who's going out, but I'm of the similar mindset to you. They have a lot of redundancy there.
Yeah, you got another, as you said, another 6'4" guard. You have this in Josh Hart, who's good. He's a good defender. Brown, not the greatest shooter, but adequate, right? And you just wonder if there's a fit there. I think if there was no Josh Hart on this team, you might say, hey, come in, let's go for a guy like a Bruce Brown. But with him there, I'm not just sure how he fits. So he's an interesting name to watch as well. I wanted to talk to you about two guards here, because I know we've been bringing up a player each here, but two guards who are with the Jazz. We got
Sure.
Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton. Now, Utah, they've been playing better lately. They got themselves into play-in contention last month. It's not really clear. Maybe you can give me a better idea on this. Are they going to be buyers or sellers come Thursday? What would it take for the Knicks to land either of these guards from Utah?
Sure. Well, first off, you touched on Jordan Clarkson. Right off the bat, Jordan Clarkson is loved by Utah's owner. It's always important when you're looking at trade talks. That's number one. They recently did an extension with him. They feel good about the number he's on now. Of those guys, I think Jordan Clarkson is more likely between him and Sexton to get moved, but I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball your way, and I'm going to say that based on my conversations with executives around the league, they think Kelly Olynyk is the guy that is going to get moved out of those players that you touched on. Kelly Olynyk going into unrestricted free agency next year, in the summer, is a guy that ironically could fit the Knicks and a lot of other teams that would be looking for some potential front court depth. Olynyk was drafted by Danny Ainge. He gets him back in Utah now, even though he had him when he was in Boston. Doesn't necessarily want to part with him, but there are a bevy of suitors for Kelly Olynyk. And a lot of times when there's that many people knocking on your door, somebody's going to make something for your worthwhile. I think for Jordan Clarkson, it's still a developing market right now. I think Sexton stays as of now. And that's kind of where I see that trio in Utah as of the start of trade deadline week coming up.
All right, so developing market there. Sexton staying as of now, but there are two guys who could fit in with the Knicks in terms of a ball handler off the bench. Now, you know this being a native New Yorker, and you know this being an NBA insider around the Knickerbockers right now. Some fans, and I'm talking about the fans here, they want to see, Mike, the Knicks add a big name or an all-star here at the trade deadline. Here's the question. Is there somebody out there? Does that all-star exist? Is there an all-star in the market that New York can land at this deadline?
Look, patience is a virtue.
That's not always here in New York, Mike. You know this.
I know, but you know what? It's worked out for the Knicks under Leon Rose's guidance to this point. I think when you're looking at the Knicks, and you asked me, Dexter, is there an all-star out there? The answer is yes, but does he fit the Knicks is the question. DeJounte Murray, this is a guy that they've had conversations about, and a guy that could alleviate some of the ball handling pressure off of Jalen Brunson in particular, which is something the Knicks want to do. Long term, they don't want to burn him out early now during the season. But in terms of the Knicks, the Brooklyn Nets also across the bridge, some teams that have had conversations with Atlanta know that the Hawks want ideally 2 first-round picks for him. They gave up a lot to get him from San Antonio when he was coming off an all-star season. Hasn't been a good fit with Trae Young. There are some questions about how he would fit with Jalen Brunson, but if the cost is low enough, it would certainly be of interest to New York, Brooklyn as well. But what is that cost? More so would be a protected first-round pick. I don't see Atlanta trying to do that yet. I've reported on HoopsHype about Atlanta having conversations with the Los Angeles Lakers and trying to find a third team that can get that would take D'Angelo Russell and would get DeJounte Murray out to Los Angeles, but it hasn't come to fruition yet, and I think that's still something to monitor because they've also been trying to market essentially Jalen Hood-Schifino, who was a first-round pick in this past draft, as that second first-round pick. So ultimately we'll see coming up in the next few days, but that's what I'm monitoring. I think for the Knicks, a lot of fans always say, well, what about Karl Towns? What about Joel Embiid?
What about those names?
Yeah, Donovan Mitchell.
Right.
It's not happening now. It's not happening at the deadline. Now, can things change in the offseason? If Cleveland, for example, is knocked out in the first round, they're going to have to reevaluate some things. The Minnesota Timberwolves, same thing. You have new contract extensions for Anthony Edwards. You have Jaden McDaniels. You have Karl Towns, who's eventually going to be making $60+ million on the back end of his contract, Dexter. Are they going to be able to afford that? Mike Conley's going to be a free agent. You're paying Rudy Gobert. That's why I say patience is a little bit of a virtue. You have to see what happens in the playoffs with these teams. Then I think the market opens up. Joel Embiid, the Sixers obviously want to keep him and have him retire as a Sixer. But the other two I mentioned, let's circle back in the offseason and see how the playoffs go, Dexter, and then we can have that conversation for Knicks fans.
This is what I've been saying when I'm asked to appear on Knicks shows and people ask me about that. I say the same thing. Patience is a virtue. If you're thinking about that star, if the Knicks are going to go that route, it's probably more likely in the offseason coming up. last thing for me on the Knicks.
Sure.
You kind of hit on this already, but how do you see this trade deadline playing out for the Knicks? Is this the season where I think you can make the argument and say, with the way they've been playing lately, Mike, that they might want to say, all right, we're going to go all in. We're going to push our chips to the center of the table. Or do they just make a smaller move, like you kind of alluded to earlier, add a rotational piece and continue to build?
There's a two-part answer to that question. I think they would if they felt that there was a star that would be that guy. But it's not at this point. So with that in mind, I think certainly they're looking to tinker around the edges and fortify their depth. And you have to be prepared, depending on what happens with Julius Randle, what's going to happen with him. Because the other thing, Dexter, we saw at the start of this year when he was coming back from injury, he had to shake off rust. And they can't, I know the minutes police are going to make a joke, but you can't play. The Knicks have shortened their rotation. And going into the playoffs, it's not sustainable to have Jalen Brunson and, 2 or 3 other guys playing 40 minutes a night. We already seen now OG Anunoby's gotten hurt. You want to preserve those guys. So ultimately, I just think that's where it's going to be for this trade deadline in particular for the Knicks. Maybe you make a short-term move that fortifies the depth, potentially in the front court, again, dependent upon what they know internally about Julius Randle. Reevaluation in a couple of weeks doesn't guarantee that he's going to be able to come back right away.
Right.
You could have a scenario where they say, well, he needs another month. This is a dislocated shoulder. This isn't something that's a light injury. So while it's not a ligament, and that's a good thing, there's still going to be, I think, more time needed for him to not only come back, but to be the Julius Randle that the New York Knicks need. And in the playoffs in particular, they need him to be the guy that he has been during the regular season. Ultimately, that, to me, is the X factor for how far the Knicks are going to go. We've seen OG Anunoby be a great fit, and we know that Jalen Brunson is a proven playoff performer. To me, Julius Randle is going to be the X factor for them going towards the playoffs. And last thing I'll leave you with, Dexter, there's a little bit of a preview for my article coming out on HoopsHype during the week, but you were talking about the Knicks and where they are.
Yeah.
Are they ready to make that big move? One rival GM told me he thinks that they are the second best team in the East right now, Boston being number 1. And I think that's pretty high praise. If you're the Knicks, and I told you coming into the year that that's where they could be viewed right now, and you've seen Philadelphia now with Joel Embiid's injury, time will tell. Milwaukee having a coaching change. The team not as young as it used to be. Defensively, they've taken a step back with Drew Holiday gone, but Damian Lillard obviously uplifts their offense and is a clutch performer. There is a world where the Knicks are at that plateau and knocking on that doorstep. I do think down the line they are going to need one more big move if Boston keeps its core going forward. But if you're a Knicks fan, you're on the rise.
And that should be good. But that goes back to the word you mentioned before, Mike, patience, which not all the Knicks fans have there. And I like that you brought that up, and people should look out for that article coming from Mike on HoopsHype. But about the rival GM saying that, I wonder how much of what he likes about the way the Knicks played, and even I'm assuming he's talking about them at full strength and healthy, is the fact that they can have wings in OG Anunoby and Josh Hart that they can put on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum that can make a difference in the series. So it's interesting he has them right there as number 2 in the East. That should make Knicks fans happy. But we'll see what the Knicks do at the deadline.
The Nets are on fire!
We got to talk some Brooklyn Nets basketball here, Mike. The Nets, they fell out of a playoff spot last month. They have not been playing well. Very simple question for me to start this here.
Sure.
Do you think the team is going to be buyers or sellers at this trade deadline?
This is what I would say, Dexter. For the Nets, they're not looking to rebuild. And so I've touched on this on HoopsHype. They have passed on interest for Mikal Bridges. The Houston Rockets were prepared to talk about bringing several of the Nets draft picks that they gave up in the James Harden trade back to them. It wasn't of interest. Particularly, this draft isn't that great anyway. I'll start there. I've been doing mock drafts for that as well. But in terms of the Nets, the 3 guys I'm looking at in particular, and whether they're going to be buyers or sellers, starts with Dorian Finney-Smith, who I think has arguably, outside of Mikal Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith, especially with playoff contenders, has had the most amount of interest of anybody on that team. Royce O'Neal, given his expiring contract, some rival GMs are wondering if they can get him for a couple of second-round picks. I'm not sure yet if that goes for the Nets. They may want to hold him And I don't think it would hurt if they're ever going to pursue Donovan Mitchell, who's his very good friend. Something to keep under your hat for the next time. But the last guy, Spencer Dinwiddie. And I've touched on this on HoopsHype, but Spencer Dinwiddie, when it comes to his time with the Nets, for the future, not as likely a long-term piece. He's kind of touched on that as well, talking about a lot of the other guys in the young group that they have going forward. Those are the three guys I'm looking at. So when you say buyers or sellers, I think ultimately if they can get picks for Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal, it'll be under consideration. But it's not necessarily to draft. It could be to flip down the line. Mikal Bridges is a guy that is on a great contract for the next 2 years. And with that in mind, it's about building with him. And there's a lot of talk about whether he's a number one option or a 2, a 3. We've seen now what it is with Mikal Bridges as a number 1. Okay?
Right.
It's about getting other stars that can balance out that roster. They've got a lot of good role players, but they need to get back to having those stars. And I do think they are going to be in the mix for star hunting again starting this summer. But for now, I think this is a vessel to get to that.
They want to get to that point. You used, I think, a very key word in that sentence there was most people have been talking about, can you build around Mikal Bridges? You said build with Mikal Bridges.
And that's a big distinction that I think people have to understand. Like, internally, the Nets have all the data, and they're looking at this team this year, okay? Sure, you could say, well, they didn't have Ben Simmons, but the reality is you can't depend on Ben anyway.
Right.
So it's really, where was Mikal on that threshold of being a 1, 2, or 3? Can you make the case that he's a 2?
You can.
Maybe. But are you going to be a finals contender? Probably not. If he's a 3, which you saw in Phoenix, now you're cooking. Okay?
Right.
That's some Sunday sauce I'd work with.
You have to bring some food reference, some sauce for you.
I
know you're going to bring that reference. No, good insight there on what they can do with the deadline. If they choose to be sellers, if you want to talk about that in terms of moving a piece like a Dorian Finney-Smith or a Royce O'Neal, their focus could be, as you kind of mentioned, to try to get future draft assets. Teams, they need wings. I just mentioned O'Neal and Dorian Finney-Smith. What are you hearing? You know there's interest in those players, but what are you hearing about the Nets' willingness to part with those players? Are they as willing to part with those players, or do they look at them as pieces that work with Mikal Bridges?
The thing about the Nets from my conversations is that they don't feel hard-pressed to do anything that they don't feel is going to move the needle. Now, what does that mean for them? That's what I'm curious of. Because to me, when you talk about Dorian and Royce, like you said, they have the availability. But for the Nets, I think if you know that you're not going to bring back Royce O'Neal, then it would behoove them to get as many draft assets as they can for him. They do know that they have a glut at that wing position and that breaking it up could behoove them going forward. But it really depends on the deals. Dorian Finney-Smith, this is a guy that a lot of playoff caliber teams are interested in. But with that said, what are those draft picks going to look like down the line? What I would say to you, Dexter, when they're evaluating deals is it's about picks in the future. We're talking well past 2024. What are some potential future first-round picks that could become, if a team, has injuries or they look like they're going to be on the downcline in a few years, that could become valuable down the line, not only for the Nets, but potentially other teams when they're going to make a trade. That's what the evaluation is right now. And, we touched on it, but again, I know a lot of fans wonder, well, what about Mikal Bridges? Would they entertain that? They have vehemently denied that they are going to move Mikal as of now. And number 2, when teams have called, it's been a no-go.
They've shut that down. All right, so that's interesting there. Brooklyn, you kind of mentioned this with Spencer Dinwiddie. They also have a need to upgrade at point guard, especially, and you also mentioned this too, the uncertainty around Ben Simmons' health. I think we're at the point you can no longer count on Ben Simmons to play the point guard position for this team or just to be available at any point. Now, we talked about DeJounte Murray with the Knicks. He's been rumored as a player the Nets could be interested in. How likely is it that the Nets look to add a player like Murray, or is there another point guard you see that they could target?
Well, now to me, now you're talking, Dexter.
Now we're talking, okay.
Because I'm looking at the Nets, and when you look at what Atlanta wants, they want expiring salary back. The whole point is that looking ahead next year, that they want to avoid the luxury tax if they can. Now, who fits that bill? Spencer Dinwiddie. Now, Spencer Dinwiddie is a guy that has an expiring contract, fits that mold. The Nets have future first-round picks. The question is, how much do they want to give up? I would sense it to be one protected first-round pick as of now. I don't know if that's enough for Atlanta. And so is there a middle ground there? Because on paper, could DeJounte Murray make them a better team? I think so. I think he's certainly a guy that is better on the ball than off the ball. We've seen that with Trae Young in his time with Atlanta. But for the Nets, is that going to be one of the guys that you want to push your chips in yet? You know that he's under contract. He just signed a big extension with the Hawks. He also has a 15% trade kicker. You have to factor that in as well when you're balancing out your cap sheets. So for the Nets, I see a world where if they can give up maybe a protected first-round pick, I think it's something they would look at. But I don't know if there's going to be that middle ground from Atlanta to push it through ultimately. But out of the two local teams, when you look at the Knicks and the Nets for DeJounte Murray, you can make an argument, as you pointed out, Dexter, in particular, that it may behoove the Nets to be more aggressive for DeJounte Murray ahead of Thursday's trade deadline.
Yeah, and you'd be interested to see how he can pair with Mikal Bridges. That would be interesting to see. Now, last thing for me on the Nets as we wrap up here, because I think when you look at how aggressive they could or may not be at the trade deadline, some people may look at Ben Simmons back on the court now. I guess somewhat back on the court. Some people might say getting him back, that's basically their trade deadline addition. Should they look at it that way? Should the Nets just stand pat with this group, look to make a run at the play-in tournament? How do you think things go for them? Like, will they be aggressive to make changes and upgrade the team, whether it's for now or for the future? Sure. Or is it just, hey, let's just stay where we are, let's get to the summer and then handle it then? Look,
Dexter, the phrase that's been described to me is the Nets are open for business. Now, with that said, what is that business going to lead to? Time will tell. But you mentioned about Ben Simmons, and is he a guy that can make a difference for them? In short stints, yes. I think there's a world where this particular season, maybe you're playing him 20-something minutes a night, and he's going at his full capacity, and you're getting a lot of assists and a lot of rebounds. You're not getting a lot of points. That's the one thing since he was in Philadelphia in the playoffs that there's been a lack of confidence for Ben Simmons to shoot in the paint and to attack the rim and get to the foul line. It's been a little disheartening to see, because I think physically it's good enough where he can do that, but it's a confidence issue at this point. But for the Nets, this season in particular, yes, there is some thought that with the healthier Ben Simmons, and Jacque Vaughn has touched on this, he makes that team a lot better. He fills up some holes. But long-term big picture, this summer, he will become an expiring contract. And in the big picture, which you know I'm always focused on.
Always.
It's about him being an asset as an expiring contract, $40+ million, and what are you doing with that? Are you going to take Ben Simmons? It doesn't matter what he does. He can be a non-factor the rest of the season, but that contract is going to be valuable this summer if a team is looking to shed salary, or if the Nets want to match salaries for a star, which is where they ultimately want to go. So I think that's more the value long-term and big picture when it comes to Ben Simmons and the Nets. Right now, I'll sum it up like this, as we touched on. Smaller moves to get to the bigger move. Which star can they get? Time will tell. But they want to be in position that they can add with Mikal Bridges. And that's what we're going to find out soon, if they have the ability to do that and get more assets by Thursday.
We're going to find out a lot soon by Thursday. You know who's going to be on top of all the coverage. This is why I had to have him here. This is my guy, fellow Brooklynite, Michael Scotto. Check out his work with HoopsHype. Seriously, it's going to be busy. The phone's going to be ringing. I know the phone is going to be. I see you checking your phone right there now. You might have missed some calls already.
We had it ready to go. Thankfully, we're good. But this thing is burning a hole in my wallet, and I look forward to after the deadline a little bit, getting away and kind of recalibrating a little bit. But thankfully, while we were taping, we had some calm, which is good. We like calm.
We like calm.
But I'll tell you right now, Dexter, and for the fans as well, like, guarantee you, trade deadline week, rumors are going to be flying like you're in high school all over again.
Yep, they will. And you know what? When you want to verify some rumors, check out what Michael Scotto. Mike, I appreciate you coming up here on New York Got Game. We will have to do it again. You are one of the best in the business. I appreciate you, my friend. We'll definitely do it again, okay?
Thank you, my brother. Anytime, my man. Always a pleasure to join you.
Always a pleasure.
New York Got Game is on fire.
On the last episode, we talked about the free agency outlook for the New York Liberty. Now, this weekend, I had a chance to catch up with some of the stars of New York's professional women's basketball squad in Brooklyn. Check it out. With the 2024 Olympic Games set to take place in Paris this summer, the USA Basketball women's national team is back on the court in search of their 8th consecutive Olympic gold medal.
It really is an honor to come to these camps. You know, whether it's your first time or, you know, your 20th year, just being around the best players in the country, in the world, it really is. It's neat, and it's an honor, and it's a pleasure.
In the first weekend of February, 18 women gathered at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn for a USA Basketball minicamp. Following the camp, 12 athletes will be selected to represent the United States at the 2024 FIBA Women's Olympic Qualifying Tournament later this month. New York Liberty players Breonna Stewart, a 2-time Olympic champion, along with Sabrina Ionescu and Benijah Laney, members of the gold medal-winning 2022 USA Women's World Cup team, are attempting to make the squad. The 3 New York players shared what they have been up to this offseason.
Work on my game, be with my family. We were in New York through the new year. We went to Spain for a little bit, and then I just came back from Spain. So just being able to kind of implement some new things and focus on building the Liberty, like physically, and also taking advantage of the momentum that we have behind the sport.
It's been great. You know, I've spent time in Japan. I took a couple weeks off when I first got there, but been able to be with my husband. He's been putting me through workouts, going up to a base, being able to play pickup. So it's been really good.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Been training basically since I was done with USA. You know, the last time that we were in training camp after the season, and so it's been really fun to get out and train, continue to work on my game, strength, speed, everything that I've wanted to, and having this little, mini camp right now, and then potentially going to Belgium is just exciting to be able to do that in season to just get real live reps against the best players in the world.
The New York Liberty players are excited to be competing with USA Basketball here at this training camp. But the last time that they were here in Brooklyn, it was not a memorable one for the Liberty as they fell to the Aces in the WNBA Finals. However, the team is focused on the goal that is ahead of them in 2024, and that is winning the franchise's first WNBA title.
I came home a couple weeks ago, and so being back here preparing for this, but then also preparing for the season with teammates, Slew and Stewie, being able to get workouts in with them, build our chemistry. We're really looking forward to and excited for the season.
I think we all knew what our goal was and wanting to kind of run it back with the same team, and now kind of getting a year under our belt and being able to hit the ground running, start training camp, it's going to be just such a different feel. And also knowing that we all went through that loss together and being able to come back and kind of have that mentality of let's go and let's be better than we were last year.
All right, the Liberty players sound like they are ready for the season. Breonna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu made the team. We'll see how the ladies represent Team USA out in Belgium at the Olympic qualifying tournament starting on February 8th. Speaking of February 8th, one programming note before we leave. This week, Thursday, February 8th, we will have the first ever New York Got Game live show. We're bringing you a trade deadline special at 2 p.m. Eastern. We've got some special guests to help break down what the Knicks and Nets will have or have not accomplished at the trade deadline. We'll be sure to see you then. It's time to bounce. Special thanks again to my guest this week, Michael Scotto. Thank you to the people who make this great show possible each and every week. Producer Brian Wiskowski, editors Antonio Oliveras Nicole and Catherine Cooper, and my director Zach Taub. I'm Dexter Henry. We'll see you next time on New York Got Game.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.